Well, good evening. It's 6:30, so we'll go ahead and begin. Thanks for coming out and letting us share with you our trip to Israel. Last October 19 to 27, I think, were the dates. We left on a Wednesday, came back on a Friday, and left out of Kansas City. Now, this trip was actually planned in 2020. October of 2020 is when we had originally planned to go to Israel. Well, we all know what happened in 2020, and so it was canceled. Israel was closed, could not go at all. Said, well, we'll think about it. We'll do it then the next year in 2021. Come 2021, Israel was still closed, and we couldn't go then, and so we delayed it another year. And so in October of 2022 here, we were able to finally do our trip, our pilgrimage to Israel. And one of the great things that happened was just a week to 10 days before we left, Israel dropped all of its COVID restrictions. So we had to no one had to have a vaccine card with them. We didn't have to be tested to get on the plane to go over. We didn't have to get tested to get on the plane to come back. They dropped all their restrictions. And so it's like, yes, thank you, God, for putting this all together for us to be able to enjoy our time in Israel. As you can see, well, originally, I had 33 people signed up to go, not just from Ascension here, but we had people from Colorado and Nebraska and Washington. The state of Washington was going to meet us there. We had all kinds of people, and of course, 2 years later, most of them dropped out except for the people of Ascension. And so all these people are from Ascension except two up there, our tour guide and Karen Funchen, who's a friend of Susan Mullinger here, who was along as well. But you can see who was there: Ann Koch, Jane Eaton, Susan Mullinger, then Stan and Paula Wilson, the Obermullers, Dave and Connie. Then you had Terry Lamont, you had Doug and Lene Wright, then you had Diane and Glenn Cork, myself and my wife Diane, and then Karen Funchen. That was our group, and it was actually a really nice-sized group. It wasn't too big that we were constantly waiting for one another, and yet it was big enough that we had a nice-sized bus that we could spread out in and travel around, and it was really easy with this size of group to check into hotels and check out. But we only had to do that twice anyway, well, 3 times that we had to do that. But it was still an easy group to travel with, and they were all excellent travelers. I have to say this at the front, but I think Jane Eaton wins the award for the trooper of the trip because she kept up with us all the time. I mean, she was right there with us the whole way and just did fantastic. So if Jane wants to go on a trip with you, let her. She's great on those trips. But for the most part this evening, I'm just going to turn it over to Lene and let her do the a narrating of our trip. If you have any questions, we have microphones here. If you have a question, just raise your hand. Or if one of the people that were on the trip, if you want to make a comment somewhere and say, oh, I want to comment some, let me know, because we've got microphones and we can let you make a comment there too, and I'll probably jump in and make comments too, It's just kind of what I do. So, so Lene, go ahead and lead us then.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming this evening. I'm sure it has been a long-awaited time for you to be able to see the pictures of what we experienced last fall. It is memorable to go back through the pictures and remember stories or remember events that did happen. So let's go ahead and begin. Probably one of the first things you want to know is, where did we fly to and from, and how long did it take us? Well, from beginning to end, from Kansas City through Newark, New Jersey to Tel Aviv, it was about 15 hours, including the layovers. Pastor, would you like to share your experience on the airplane?
Oh, so on the trip over, the plane was probably half and half of just people traveling over there, but then there were also about half of it were Jewish people and Orthodox Jews, especially Hasidic Jews, traveling over as well. The plane that we took over was a 787 from Newark to Tel Aviv. And so it was, 232 was the seating arrangement there with the big overhead luggage. And I was on the aisle seat there, and about halfway through the night on the flight over there to Tel Aviv, how long was the flight? 10 hours from Newark to Tel Aviv, something like that is what it was. Just sitting there resting, one of the Jewish gentlemen came and opened the luggage rack right above where I was sitting there, and a crutch fell out and banged me right on top of the head. I mean, just boom, and it falls to the ground. And the guy gets up and walks away. Didn't say a thing. And that, but then, then of course the flight attendants saw that, and they all come running. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. But it was a rude way to awake.
Once we arrived in Tel Aviv, we were able to get to our hotel and rest up. So the very first thing that we got to do was visit the seashore in Caesarea Maritima, where you have the remains of some of the Roman aqueduct system that delivered water back in the day, which a lot of that still stands today. And I was surprised by just it just felt definitely like a beach scene that you could see elsewhere around the world. There also are the remains of the amphitheater at Caesarea Maritima. And if you go to Acts 12, you're going to see an account of King Herod Agrippa. I think he died in that amphitheater from worms eating him. The acoustics are pretty good. You could hear a lot of the sounds that were happening inside the amphitheater as we were there. These are archaeological ruins of Caesarea Maritima, of what it was at the time where you had a port city. And this was the port city where Paul left to go to Rome. This is also where King Herod had his building set up called the Presidium, I believe. Pastor, was it called Presidium? He had his palace that jutted out into the ocean, and you could see remains of the swimming pool that he had in his palace. I did not put one in there.
So what I found fascinating is just down there from the colonnades, the partial colonnades that you see there, the columns, there is a swimming pool, a big square area with the rock bottom on it, where the water, right there, where the water from the Mediterranean Sea would, fill the swimming pool. And I'm like, okay, so this was like 20, 30 AD, and the water from the Mediterranean Sea was filling the swimming pool there, and it's still filling the same swimming pool. It is not underwater. It's not, sunk down or anything. I'm like, so where's the rising seas if, the same water from 30 AD is still the same level filling the swimming pool there at Caesarea Philippi?
Okay. Question? And I think while we were there, there was, I think, some kind of aircraft flyover at that time, and that little black dot up there in the sky, I think, is the only thing we could catch from that when they flew over. I think we were told it was just routine military maneuvers. Here is an image overlooking the Mount Carmel mountain range. And if you remember back to the Old Testament, Mount Carmel is where? Elijah and the prophets. Thanks, Deb. Here's another image from the Mount Carmel mountain range overlooking the Jezreel Valley. And then we were able to visit the Tel Megiddo, which is where the fortress was built over time through the generations where the Armageddon came from.
Yeah, in Hebrew, the word for hill is har, H-A-R. And so Tel Megiddo is Har Megiddo, which is the hill Megiddo there, and that's where Armageddon comes from. It's just the hill Megiddo.
This was a pretty rocky area to walk around, and looking at what used to be the remains of the walls, you can see off in the distance some of the people walking through the ruins there off in the distance. There's a nice contrast with some of the palm trees. One of the fascinating things was the remains of the grain silo that was built during the time of King Jeroboam II in the 8th century BCE. There was 2 sets of stairs. One set allowed the slaves to bring the grains into the silo, and the efficiency to allow another set of stairs so they could climb back out. This is the Jezreel Valley again from the top of Tel Megiddo, and what you're going to see is some of the nice green agriculture crops that are being grown. And off in the distance, you have cattle.
When you see the rest of Israel, and you see how hilly and steep it is, you can see then this is kind of like the only flat area in the country of Israel, this Jezreel Valley. And the Jezreel Valley is where all the major military battles took place in Israel, which is why you got Armageddon battle taking place there too. But this is the same valley where the Assyrians battled the Egyptians under Pharaoh Necho, and Pharaoh Necho was defeated here and went back to Egypt, and that's where the Assyrians then completed their conquering of the northern kingdom. But your big major battles all took place in the Jezreel Valley, because it's the only flat area in Israel.
Even though it wasn't totally clear, you could still see off in the distance here Mount Tabor, which was the Mount of Transfiguration. Also, what was interesting is around Tel Megiddo were a lot of the dates that were growing. Then we headed over to look at the area for Nazareth. So even though we didn't go into Nazareth, we were able to see it off in the distance because our viewing was done from Mount Precipice, which is south of Nazareth there, and it's known as the breadbasket of Israel, where you can see the different crop lines off in the distance. And I thought that was interesting just because we're coming from Kansas and being part of the breadbasket of the Midwest.
So do you know what the Mount of Precipice is? This is where Jesus, when he was in the synagogue in Nazareth, they asked him to read scripture, and he read from Isaiah, where he said, after reading that, he said, "This scripture is fulfilled in your presence," and they got mad at him for doing that, and they ran him out of the city to the edge of the cliff then to toss him off. And this is the cliff then where they were going to toss him off. And that's why it's called then the Mount of Precipice there.
We went further north to the area called Caesarea Philippi, which is near the Lebanon border. And this is an area that Jesus and his disciples met at, and it was a very pagan area. So pagan that you had worship sites dedicated to Pan and Zeus, and sacrifices could be made. So off to your left there is the opening of a cave where they could do animal sacrifices. And so because of the blood associated with the animal sacrifice, you had what was known being the gates of Hades.
Yeah, in that section, in that story there, remember Jesus says, that Peter, upon your confession, upon you, I will build my church, and the gates of hell cannot stand against it. Well, this is the gates of hell, right there at Caesarea Philippi. And the interesting thing is, the bottom of that cave there is filled with water, and the people who did the sacrifice then, if they sacrificed the animal, the goat, and tossed it in, and the goat sank, it would they said, okay, your sacrifice is accepted. If the goat didn't sink, then they said, hey, they didn't accept your sacrifice, you need to pay for another goat and have it sacrificed. Well, the thing is they never punctured the lungs of the goats when they sacrificed it, so when they tossed it in, the goat would always stay floating, and so that's how they extracted more funds out of the people coming to sacrifice to Pan and Zeus.
Due to its location, which was near Mount Hermon, then we were able, I'm going to come back to that. These are figs. I like to take a lot of nature pictures, so things you don't get to see a lot of in Kansas. We got to visit this nature reserve. That was a real beautiful walk down with some interesting wildlife. We'll get to that. Looks like I passed it. There is a waterfall there at the base of this nature walk, and so we were able to spend some time there getting pictures and enjoying the waterfall there. It seemed to be pretty much just like an isolated little area to visit. So here's a recording we did. And wasn't this also the start of the water that would flow down to the Jordan River from here?
Very strong. Yes, right?
We also, when we descended down, we were met by this little critter who was quite vocal about not letting us pass. Close. It's a rock hyrax, which was interesting to me because I had never heard of this critter before, and it is related to the elephant and the manatee.
So they say.
It made a very shrill alarm, and so our tour guide didn't want us to try to pass by this animal, not knowing what it would do. We realized that it was watching over its young on the other side of the path, and so they used some rocks to make a distraction for us to pass. We also visited the Church of the Multiplication, where the loaves of bread and fish were multiplied. And they have built a church on that location and have some mosaic artwork embedded in the floor to represent what happened at that site. And this was at Tabqa of Israel.
The rock underneath the altar is supposedly the place where they did the blessing for the fish and the 5 loaves. That's what multiplication, that's the fish and 5 loaves feeding of the 5,000 in Capernaum, outside of Capernaum there. And that's supposedly the rock is where that took place.
This is our first look at the Sea of Galilee. And one of the things you're going to notice on the far right-hand side there, that's not sand that's on that beach line. It is tiny, tiny little seashells. I think some of the group took their shoes and socks off and waded down into the water. Were you one of them, Diane? Connie, you were. Was the water warm or cold? Okay.
But you can see the opposite shore of the Sea of Galilee. You would think it was bigger than it is, but that's the opposite shore, what they would call Transjordan or the Decapolis area. And it's over on those hills on the other side then where Jesus, found the demoniac living out there and cast the demons out of the demoniac into the pigs, and the pigs ran down into the Sea of Galilee. Well, that's those hills just right across there is where that happened.
We also visited a church site which was considered the Church of the Primacy of St. Peter. This is the location where they believe that between Jesus and Peter, that he'd asked Peter, do you love me? He goes, of course I do, Lord. And so he did it 3 times. Then we went on to visit the remains of the town of Capernaum. The sign that I put up there is the actual sign they have outside the entrance there. There's 2 different kinds of stones that they used. The dark stones were used to denote it was the older remains of the buildings that were there. They didn't tend to pull a lot of those rocks and ruins away. They would just build on top. This is also inside Capernaum. This was the archaeological ruins of Peter's house. They did not want to build directly on it, so the church that they built on that spot, they built up and over it so you could still see it. They were holding a church service at the time that we were there, and I think a few of you went in to the church once the service was over with.
Yeah, there's actually a hole in the middle of the church there in the very center that looks right down onto Peter's house, and it's open to the inside, so you can walk up to the edge of that and just look down right into Peter's house.
This was the synagogue that was there in Capernaum, and these are the remains of it. This would have been the general meeting area for the men to listen to the teachings. I think they had an area off to the right-hand side that was for the women to meet in. We were blessed that Sunday morning with a beautiful image of a sunrise over the Sea of Galilee that morning. Because that was the morning that we took a boat into the middle of the lake and held a worship service. It was a pretty big boat. Pastor led us in devotion. There was a group on board that could lead us in worship songs, and so they blessed us with singing a song in Hebrew at the end. So we were thankful for Glenn Cork for a lot of his pictures. He went around and took a lot of pictures of us on the boat ride that morning. One of the things I thought was really neat is that I think 10, 20, somewhere in the last 20 years, they found the remains of an old boat there on the Sea of Galilee, and it took quite the scientific effort to remove it from the soil to preserve it. So when they were able to bring it out and slowly dry it out, this room is in a museum where they keep it isolated off, and there are means of getting it wet. So there's like some kind of rain device that can put moisture onto the boat if they need to keep the moisture in there. We visited the Church of the Beatitudes, which is on the hillside where Jesus delivered his Beatitudes in Sermon on the Mount. This church was built in the location that the Italian architect thought it would have the most prominence in the area. And I know we were told by our tour guide we were supposed to remember the name of the Italian architect. It was an Italian name, that's all I can remember. Balducci or something like that. The inside of this church, although small, had some really nice features up in the dome cupola area, which had stained glass windows with each of the Beatitudes in each of the windows. And it's hard to capture all 8 sides with a circular dome with a single camera lens.
And you can see that they're all in Latin, these Beatitudes there. Like the one just to the 7 o'clock position, Beati Pauperis, that's blessed are the poor in spirit, spiritus, for theirs is, for they will receive the kingdom of heaven. Or in the next one over, Beatity, the next way, the 6 o'clock. Beatity Pacifici, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall inherit the earth, and so each of those things in Latin there are the Beatitudes that Jesus spoke.
Then we visited Magdala, where they had found the remains of a synagogue there. And what was interesting was just the artwork and the flooring used with mosaics. So in the bottom right-hand side is the remains of that mosaic. And you could see over time that instead of it being a flat surface, it was pretty curvy over time. I guess that's just my idea that I like some of the ruins and what it could have been back when it was actively used. There on the upper right-hand side was the remains of the stand where they would read the scrolls during the scripture or during the service. So we were also able to visit this encounter painting in the encounter chapel at Magdala. And this painting is a modern day painting of the interpretation of the woman who sought healing from Jesus. And you can see her hand reaching out and the healing power she received when she made contact with the hem of the robe of Jesus' robe.
When you look at it, if you could see it more up close, in that what's interesting about it is after she touches it, the artist has her hand healed part way and then leprosy the rest of the way up the arm. So you can almost get the image or the idea of the healing that's just coming through her arm, through the rest of her body. And this was the story in Scripture, where the lady said, if I can just touch him, I will be healed. And so she touches him and is healed, and Jesus says, "Who touched me?" And the disciples were going, "Look, you're in the middle of the crowd. People are jostling you all over the place, and you're asking, 'Who touched you?'" And he said, "Yes, because I felt power go out of me." And so it's a really powerful painting down there, and you can purchase prints of it there as well. But it's a really, when you can see it up close, it's a really neat painting.
And it's a quite large piece of art.
Very large.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I noticed as we were exiting out were these olive trees outside the chapel there, which look like olives that I think they should look like because they're green. But there will be pictures here coming up in other locations we were at where they were not green. Then this is the first of 2 sites we visited. The Jordan River, the baptismal site of Jesus. And so you were able to go down into the water and touch it as well. I had shared this particular photo with our youngest son, and he says, "That's not quite how I thought about it would look."
There were several people who took their shoes off and waded around in the water there. as you could do that. And there were fish in the water there who would come up and nip you a little bit, when you're in the water. And so people, oh, when they were wading in the water, as the fish would, kind of nip, and it didn't hurt them or anything. It was just, kind of bump them. So it was funny. Oops.
Then we visited in the lower Jordan Valley, Bet Shan, and Bet Shan is once again the archaeological ruins of a large city that was part of the Decapolis cities. The interesting thing about the ruins of this is the columns that made up the main shoppy street, the main street, and off to the sides there. You'll see some of them are standing off in the distance, but a lot of them had toppled over. And I think in a sermon, Pastor talked about, it was a sermon here somewhere in the last 4 months or so, you talked about the columns, how they had fallen over. They believe it was an earthquake that did that because they're all in the same direction. But to get an idea of size of what we're looking at, I took a picture of Dave Obermuller as he was walking away from the columns. And if you look at this column here and compare it to the size of Dave, you get an idea of how big these columns are. Dave, stand up. There you go. Thank you.
And most of these columns are monoliths, which means they were carved out of one stone. They weren't stacked, things stacked on them. They were just one big stone carved that way. So it just amazes me the work that it had to taken to build those colonnades.
And the next picture will be when we are standing on top of this tell, looking back down this main street of Bet Shan. And there you go. Now we're standing on top of it, looking back where we had walked. So the prior picture was right here, and the picture of Dave was right over here. And you get an idea of the vast size of these ruins. There is an amphitheater back over here that we tested the acoustics out, and thanks to Diane and Connie and Paula, they sang for us, and it was, did I sing on that one? Okay. It's just really neat to hear the acoustics of something designed so long ago and not having any electronics to help get that across.
So Beth Shan in the Bible, what is significant about Beth Shan in Scripture? Who was from Beth Shan? Does anyone know? King Saul. This is King Saul's hometown. So that when he was killed, they took his ruins back to Beth Shan because his mom was from Beth Shan. And so this is where King Saul was buried, probably right there in the tell somewhere at that time.
Now we're back in the Jerusalem area, and this is overlooking a part of the Jewish cemetery that lies between the Mount of Olives and Jerusalem. And it just, to me, it's incredible to look at, to think of how many graves there are there. But if you look, you can see the size of the people as they're walking up. That gives you an idea of the size of this. And the graves are all facing the side of the city walls, because the Jewish people believe that when Jesus returns through the Golden Gate,
Yeah,
the Golden Gate, that with them facing it, they will be the first ones to be raised from the dead.
Tell them about the tower in back.
Does anyone recognize what this tower is in the background of this picture? I thought it was called.
No, this is part of an old Byzantine church, and that's supposedly the site of the Ascension there. So that's the Mount of Olives.
Now we're on the side of the city walls of Jerusalem looking back over
Across the Kidron Valley.
the Kidron Valley and the Jewish cemetery. And once again, to understand the size, these are full-size buses that are lined up on the street that separates two sides of that Jewish cemetery.
Show them the path down.
So we were able to walk down the Palm Sunday path along the side of the cemetery down the mount.
That was the Palm Sunday path to Jerusalem.
Then we got to spend the very first thing in the morning visiting the Garden of Gethsemane, where Pastor led us once again in some devotion. I believed it was a very peaceful time with the images that I think will stay with me. There were very big trees and very old trees there that made me think of how long they've been there, as well as the color of the olives in this particular olive tree. And it wasn't exactly flat. You could walk up to a different level and look back over the city of Jerusalem. And that shows you the close proximity between the Garden of Gethsemane and Jerusalem, as well as the different elevations they used to walk down or to walk up.
So you can imagine then if the priests sent their soldiers after Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, coming from the Temple Mount over there, he could see them coming, at night there with his torches and that. He could see them coming. He knew what was going to happen because he's there in the garden and it's the elevation on the other side. You can see him coming down the side of the hill after him. And yet he didn't run.
So the next picture is going to be the start of a series of pictures that was the Church of All Nations. I like a lot of architecture and a lot of design, so you're going to see a series of pictures of the outside and the inside. But the one thing I thought was really neat is that when we enter the Church of All Nations, there was just some beautiful music being played and people singing. The top of the church has a lot of the mosaics as well as the images of, wasn't it something to do with Peter? No, at the top, the animals and the cross. I thought they said something about the animals on top there. It was explained to us also, the picture on the right, there were different kinds of colonnades, and you could figure out by looking at it whether it was of a Roman-made build or whether it was of a Corinth-made build. There was a third one, but I can't remember it. Byzantine, okay. I think this one, wasn't that one a Corinth top? We had a lot of information to try to remember. These are the ceilings inside that church. A lot of symbolism, a lot of sensory overload, I think.
The rock was there.
Yeah, there's a picture coming up of that. Once again, you have the cupola of the dome at the top there. And then where people are lined up, they were in line to go see the rock that was near the altar, and they believe that was the rock that Jesus prayed on that last night where he bled tears of blood. Sweat. Now we move on to Bethlehem, the Church of the Nativity. From the location this picture was taken, you are standing in Manger Square. That's the door to get in. It is short with a specific purpose, and that was to, one, to tour raiders from riding in and doing destruction, but also to have people have to bow to get in. Of course, I've got to tell you, I didn't know you're supposed to have bent over like that. I just naturally went like this to get in, so I didn't bend. There was a 2-hour wait to stand in line to go visit the birthplace of Jesus here at this location. And the altarpiece was very, very gilded and ornate. But our tour guide took some of us 2 by 2 to the back door. And so quickly, before we were told to move out of the way, you could take a picture and look in, and people are kneeling on the base there of the grotto where they believed that Jesus was born. Scott and Marge, when you went, did you guys go into there? Well, there was one off to the side, too. Oh, okay.
No, this one's not right.
There's another picture there showing all the ornateness of the altar. One of the things that was pointed out to us was a mosaic map that kind of shows the proximity of the different locations. So Jerusalem being up here, then you've got the Church of the Nativity here, then you've got the Shepherd's Field, where the shepherds were told of Jesus' birth here. And then they have it labeled the Milk Grotto with the Virgin Mary, and I'm trying to remember why they specifically pointed that out.
Bet Bahur is where our tour guide lived.
Oh, the road to Bet Bahur, pastor says this was the location of where our tour guide, Raid, was where he and his family lived. There's pictures coming up of that. There is an overlook of the Shepherd's Field. I don't know what else to say about this picture. There it is. There is a chapel also built there near the Shepherd's Field. Once again, it was just a beautiful, small chapel with every wall having artwork done to depict the birth of Jesus, as well as a nice dome on the center there, and the acoustics, once again, were just really beautiful. Paula Wilson blessed us all with her gifts, and she sang a cappella during this time we were in the chapel. I feel like I'm missing something here.
Nope.
Yeah, go ahead and hit the button. Okay, there we go, that one. So off in the distance is Bethlehem. We are at the base of Herodium, so Pastor was able to work out an extra stop on our trip to visit the ruins of Herodium, where that is the burial site of King Herod from the Bibles, from Jesus' birth. Once again, more ruins. I think one of the rooms that we visited was kind of neat, was like the sauna room, and then the roof was still intact, which is a circular ceiling that had an outlet in the top for the steam to escape from. Then if you climbed to the top, you could look back over the ruins to get a better idea of the size of Herodium. They did have a miniature in place so you could see what it looked like at the time of Herod. So if you couldn't picture it with the ruins, you could picture it with a miniature replica. So you just hit the button. It's not going again. I took this picture at the top of Herodium because I kind of like the picture, the idea of the sky with the rays of light coming down through the clouds when I was looking at Bethlehem at that time. So after we got done, we were able to visit Raid's family in his home there in Bethlehem. Our tour guide, Raid Benora, and his wife and 3 daughters. They treated us to snacks and drink, and I think Connie and Paula got to play with the little girl and sing Jesus Loves Me with her. He is a Palestinian Christian. Oh, Raid? Oh. Small world. Raid went by 2 names. Raid was his birth name. His Christian name was Paul. I think everyone, was it Paul? Everyone called him Raid. Yeah. Then we got to visit the Nissan Brothers olive wood factory. They're in Bethlehem, where they show a lot of their hand wood carvings from olive wood, including the pile of wood they worked from, some of the examples of what they were working on, and then some of the people that were working the day we visited there. And of course, you can buy something. And they had about everything possible there that you could buy, from the littlest thing to the biggest thing. I think a lot of us picked up some souvenirs to bring home of hand-carved olive wood items. Was this the location that Jane got badgered by the street seller? Jane, where are you? Yeah. Yeah. I think this is the location. Jane just had this really nice look, and this guy was persistent. She got back on the bus, and he still tried to find her behind the shaded glass outside and tried to keep selling her to her through
5 scarves for $10. Now 6 scarves for $10. Now 7 scarves for $10.
Now we get to visit the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea's off in the distance on this particular picture that we took at Masada, but I think it was good to show you just different images of the Dead Sea. Pastor, I think that may be your picture. We got to go visit Masada. Thank goodness they had cable cars to take us up, although there was a walking path for the few brave souls who wanted to walk up that. Chuck was a brave soul at some time when he visited. Very good. Good for you. Yeah, you can see the little walking paths. There's a person right there making their way up.
It's called a snake path.
Pastor says it's called a snake path. And this image shows us at the railing. We were overlooking I want to call it paramount, that's not right. The catapult, no. The mound that was built by the Romans in order to invade Masada. It took a period of, 2 years to dump dirt?
No, not 2 years, only 6 months.
Oh, sorry, 6 months.
The ramp.
There we go. Now this gives you a really good idea of the color contrast that exists looking out over the Judean desert. Yeah, definitely the wilderness, Pastor says.
And over on the left-hand side there, those were the Roman encampments where the Roman soldiers were that worked on that ramp that they built up there. They lived in those quarters there, and there was one on there were 4 of them surrounding Masada. So the people up at Masada had no way to escape.
This is also the day of the solar eclipse.
Mm-hmm.
They are still doing archaeological finds by having teams go in and slowly, tediously work on every aspect. Here you see people working on the flooring there, and I got a close-up of just what they were doing, cleaning, scrubbing, removing. And once again, we were thankful to have replicas so that we have an idea of what we were looking at while we were there. So the picture on your right is the ruins of, I think, was that his bedroom he was able to look out over? There in the left-hand side is the circular room of that particular build. I think in that one picture you can kind of see one of the encampments there. I like this particular picture because you can see the layers, the strata, off in the distance of the different layers over the years and years and years. And once again, there's a lot of beige and cream. Then we got to stop at En-Gedi, which was the area that David hid out in and had access to water when he was running from King Saul. So we were able to go down to the little waterfall. And this also is the area known for the ibex that climb trees. So none of us were prepared when we went by the first time when we saw them in this tree standing. So when we came back and we were ready to take the pictures, they were not in the trees anymore. Then we were on to Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. And if you notice off here, we experienced a small little sandstorm during the solar eclipse. This picture is a close-up of the opening where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. It's kind of hard to tell with all the same colors, but I kind of think this looks like a lion head. There's the eye, there's a snout, there's its mouth. That's just me. The Dead Sea Scrolls, or a copy of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Doug, you want to hit that button? It's just not doing anything. Thank you. The second stop of what was the baptismal site of Jesus at the Jordan River. This happens to be right where the Jordan side meets that river. So this is the Jordan side. Well, Jordan, the country. So they have soldiers on their side. And while we were there, once again, there was a baptism taking place, and a few brave souls that decided to take their shoes and socks off and enter the Jordan River at this location. I won't even try to pronounce that location. It starts with a Q.
Qasr el Yahud.
There you go. Go ahead and hit the button for it. Then we got to float in the Dead Sea. Here you have pictures of those who decided to do with mud because of the minerals that are found in the mud of the Dead Sea. It is a very rich mud. So Glenn and Diane took the challenge and mudded themselves up, and then a few decided to try to float in the Dead Sea. Very buoyant. This is the only time I have seen my husband float, is in the Dead Sea. There was a challenge for those who did float. They had a buoyancy problem to get back upright.
Yeah, it's so buoyant that to try to get your feet back under you basically had to bring them and pull them up under yourself and roll yourself forward and then push them down real quick. Otherwise, you would just pop right back up again. It's that buoyant because it's 30 times more salty than the ocean, you know. So it's just, and it feels oily. Your skin feels oily when you have the Dead Sea water on you. Well, and the ground was really slick, walking on it.
We ended that evening going through Jericho, and here you have the Mount of Temptation where Jesus was tempted by Satan. And then just some of the images of the roadside. So I just found it fascinating, just roadside. Here's a woman walking fully clothed, well, fully robed.
This is Palestinian territory. This is not Jewish territory. In Palestinian territory, you find a lot of that kind of trash. Around.
Yeah. But this also was the fun stop because you could ride a camel.
Oh, I should have I've got a video of Jane riding the camel, and so I should have given it to you and let you watch Jane ride the camel.
We also have rush hour in Jericho. We were able to watch someone herding their goat and sheep back from the fields into the city. So it's kind of interesting to have to stop and wait for the wildlife to go past. And a beautiful picture of Jerusalem, the holy city. There was panoramic sites that we got to see, and more of the Jewish cemetery. Walking the Palm Sunday path. And then this is one of the locations they believe that Jesus was a supposed place of Jesus' crucifixion. They can't prove either one, but the Golgotha being the place of the skull. And although there was elements of this hill has now since disappeared, there is a black and white image from years ago that shows the image of a skull. It looks like a skull that's in the hillside. So this is why one of the beliefs that this is the location of the crucifixion. At that time, it was outside of the city. So then we went to visit the Garden Tomb, which is one of the two locations possibly of where Jesus was buried. This one, I think, is more of the picturesque one that we like to think this is where it was. And very appropriate, since we're just a little bit out from Easter, Pastor had to go in to make sure that he wasn't there. Inside the tomb, there was also markings that takes us back to the Crusades. Was that right when they said from the Crusades? Mm-hmm. And then we hit now with more of the temple area. This is a picture to get an idea of what the main street looked like in Jesus' time, as well as the southern steps. So here you see the main street, and then the southern steps here. You can go to the next picture, Doug. This is the ruins of the main street now that runs the length of the western wall.
When the Babylonians destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, one of the things they did was take those big blocks of stone that were part of the wall and just tossed them over the side. They took implements and basically wedged them over the side. And so if you go back one.
Go back one, Doug.
Those craters in the street were made by the stones that fell from the top of the wall and hit the street down below it. And that's the damage of the street itself from the size of those rocks, because those rocks were like 2 and 3 tons each that they were able to wedge off the top of the wall when the Babylonians destroyed the temple.
Okay. And in that next picture, there is off in the distance, you can see me off to the side. That gives you an idea of the size of one block. I'm just a tad bit taller than the block itself. And an idea of how many layers of blocks they used to build up the walls. This is Paul and Stan standing outside the area of the southern steps of the temple. And that, once again, that shows you the size of these steps when you see them in proximity to it. And there in the background, you can see the archways of the gates that have been closed off. Then we just walked over to the tunnel opening so that we could walk through Hezekiah's tunnel, which was built in the Old Testament, which was the waterway to get water access. So we survived Hezekiah's tunnel. You had to provide your own light. We had water shoes to get through there. It wasn't a flat surface, so we helped each other out by letting us know where the holes were as we walked. And it was deep at points. If you notice here on Diane, she has some darker lines at the bottom of her shorts. It shows that at one point she had to wade pretty high there. And an idea of how some of the people live there in Jerusalem, you could just see the layers of the different buildings that work their way up, building after building after building.
That town is called Silwan today, but in Jesus' time it'd be Siloam, because this is where the Pool of Siloam was located, but it's called Silwan today. So if you ever see, they say in Silwan, Silwan, that's right by the Pool of Siloam.
See how far I've gone. Okay. One of the things I thought was neat too is that they had a model city at the Israel Museum that you could look at in great detail to understand the layout of the city during Jesus' time and where the different locations were. That's one of them. I think we probably could have spent more time there, but it was towards the end of the day and we had to hurry on our way. Now you have some pictures of as we went through the old city and the different markets that we could pass by. Oops. Leather, nuts, fruits, spices, fabric, and just to get an idea of the width of the street, there you go. There's each side of the street as you're walking. They even had Kansas City Chiefs shirts there. I had pastor interpret that bottom line to make sure it said Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, it does. In Hebrew, the letters there, it's Knesset, it's Kansas, and then it's CT, and then it's a Z sound actually, but they have it as far as chief at the end.
Then you're reading from
right
to
Kansas
left, yeah.
City, and then Chiefs. Sha'ifs.
Yeah.
It's funny.
This also shows you the vastness. This is the ruins built up over the Pool of Bethesda. And if you look off here, you can see this is Dave and Connie Overmueller. Look how tiny they are compared to the whole entire complex of the Pool of Bethesda. Then we were able to walk the Via Dolorosa through the different stations of the cross, explained to us by a tour guide. And this is Glen Cork in the middle, one of the locations where they believe Jesus stumbled along his walk, and that is a stone that you could touch along the way. Then we enter the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. There's a very large mural upon your entrance. Once again, you had to read it from right to left. To me, this was a very, very crowded location. It was very crowded. We were given a time element that we had to meet back up by just because of trying to get around, see everything. I was taken by a lot of the ceilings, a lot of the detail everywhere you look. Once again, a lot of sensory. So as you see from the different images there, there's a lot going on to look at.
Yeah. Okay, so she asked, the churches, when were they built and who takes care of them today? It really all depends. You have three basic groups of people who have churches there. You have the Catholic Church that's there. You have the Greek Orthodox Church that's there. And then you also have the Coptic Church that's there. And so each of the churches, it all depends on who was in control when they were built. So like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre there that we just looked at is a Byzantine church. And so this was built during the early, 1300 AD time period is when that church was built. And of course the Byzantines say, this is the place where the crucifixion and burial took place. We saw another place, that claimed to be that place as well. But it all depends on who was in control at the time. So the Church of the Beatitudes was built in the 1940s or so, 30s and 40s. So it was relatively modern. And some of the other churches, it all depends on when they were built and who was in control at the time. So you have a wide range of dates for the churches to be built. Raid's thing was wherever the Byzantines built, that's the place where it actually happened. Because he said those were the first group of people to come in, after the Babylonian captivity and all that. And because, from the time of the Babylonian captivity until, until the Christians came in, the Byzantines, see, they came from Turkey, because Turkey was really the first area that Paul, did his missionary work. There was in Turkey, and so the Byzantines are some of the earliest Christians, besides the ones in Jerusalem and in the Coptics in Egypt. The Byzantines, when they finally came back, started building these churches at different places, and at the one place there on the Jordan where the Casa El Yahud there's a Byzantine church at that spot, but not at Yardenit, up the river further. And so they said, well, this is the place probably where Jesus' baptism took place, because this is the earliest church in the area. So you've got a wide range of time period of who built it and where. Raid's thing was wherever the Byzantines built, that's probably where it took place, because they were the first ones there.
Did you visit St. Anne's Church there by the pools of Bethesda?
Yes, yeah, we visited
St. Anne was the mother of Mary, and that church was a Crusader-built church.
Yeah, it's a Crusader-built church, and the Crusades were in the 11 and 1200s ADs. So, yeah.
We did get to visit a Lutheran church, the Lutheran Church of the Redeemer, which is right next to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Yeah. And so once again, we did some a cappella singing inside this church. It was a great location to connect with our Lutheran heritage. Then we got to visit the Jewish quarter, because the old city is divided into 4 quarters: the Armenian, the Jewish, the Christian, and the Muslim quarter. So this is the Jewish quarter. And there on the right-hand side are the remains of the marketplace during Jesus' time, and a picture below that depicts what it would have looked like during his time. The other picture is just a lot more murals and mosaics that I like to take a picture of. Here is an image of the Wailing Wall in the evening time. A few of them ventured out in the evening. And this is when you actually see the Jewish people at the Wailing Wall. They have it divided between men and women. This is the men's side. And in the crevices of the wall, you can place prayers. And so they are full of little pieces of paper. And I saw on the news during Holy Week, that's the time they actually go and remove all of the prayers, load them up, and they say they bury them at the Mount of Olives. And then during the daytime is when we visited. So here's a picture of Pastor and Diane with the Wailing Wall in the background. We were also given a timeline of how long to stay and when to meet up with Raid, so we could...
There was a bar mitzvah happening there in the background, too. That's why all the people have that white color and all that on. There was a bar mitzvah going on in the women's section. So I guess that would be a bat mitzvah then instead of a bar mitzvah. Then
we got to visit the church of St. Peter I call it Cantu, but I think you call it Gallicantu.
Yeah, Gallicantu.
Okay.
If you knew Latin, Galle is the word for chicken in Latin, and then cantu is from cantus, to sing, or the rooster crowing. So this is the rooster crowing church, the Gallicantu.
But I think they also thought this was the location of Caiaphas, where Jesus was taken. And inside here, everything once again was just painted and gilded, and there was so much to take in. And it was actually a very quiet place. Inside, you didn't hear a lot of the outside sounds when we were there.
Yeah, what's interesting is that this is one of the few French churches that were built there. So a monastery, a monk group from France had this built at this location. So it's one of the few French architecture churches.
And they did discover that beneath this church was actually openings where they believed that prisoners were lowered. Let's see if I can get that to go. Doug, you want to advance that one? The underground caves where they were rediscovered in the late 1800s, and believed this was where the public jail was as they awaited court trials. So we were able to descend down into these openings and wonder if that's where Jesus spent some of his time. And then we were able to look at the stones that were left from the original path that maybe Jesus took to get down to the Garden of Gethsemane.
No.
Oh, garden.
No, this is the path from the Caiaphas palace to Pilate's place, staying there on the Temple Mount. And so this is the path from Caiaphas's place to Pilate's place on that night. Then after the trial that took place early in the morning on that Good Friday.
They have it sectioned off, so you couldn't actually go down there, but you could stand there and look at it. If you want to know what kind of food we ate, here's a good example. This was some of the buffet set out for us to choose from. In the foreground there are just bowls full of dates and figs and fruits and nuts, all labeled so we would know what it was we were choosing from, including fresh vegetables that I thought was very nicely bright and tantalizing to choose from, as well as desserts and cheeses. One of the stops, we stopped at Bethlehem to get a falafel or shawarma.
It depends.
Well, these are two different locations. The one on your right was the falafel at our little roadside place.
Right. That was good.
That was very good. I think that was chicken cutlet in there. Oh. The one on your left was where you could order up, and they would freshly slice the meat off the circular skewer there, as you can see the meat there. And the sandwiches were quite large. That's an image of what Doug and I shared. It was so big. It was really good too. And the other thing I thought you'd like to see is there's our receipt, because you know me, I like receipts. There's my receipt from ordering the food. Not that I can read it. Oh, Connie just said the Coca-Cola there was the best. And that is a summary of our trip to Israel.
Any questions that you want to ask? Anyone? Yeah. No, we did not go to Bethlehem Lutheran Church. Did not have time. Yeah, they do. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Donna? Yeah, we went through, Imagine Tours is who we went through. It's a person out of Florida that, where is she? There she is. Her brother